Although the area around Paris has been inhabited by humans for nearly 10,000 years, the settlement that would become the capital of France owes its name and origins to the Gaulish tribe known as the Parisii, who settled along the banks of the Seine between 250 and 225 BC. Although they initially called the settlement Lucca, the fort and bridges that they built across the river ensured control over the vital north-south trade routes between northern Europe and the Mediterranean, which made the town prosperous enough to mint its own gold coins. This wealth, however, made it an attractive target for the expanding Roman Republic, which during the 50s BC began its conquest of Gaul, or what is now modern-day France. In 52 BC, the Roman army reached the gates of Lutetia and forged the Parisii and other Gaulish tribes in the Battle of Lutetia. After decisively defeating them, the Romans established a new settlement on the site named Lutetia Parisorium. The Roman town grew on the left bank of the Seine, laid out in classic Roman style along a north-south axis, centered around a bustling forum complete with a temple and a basilica. Nearby, a massive amphitheater rose in the 1st century AD, big enough for 15,000 spectators, even though only about 8,000 people lived in the town. Over the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, Lutetia expanded, though it stayed modest compared to major Roman cities like Lyon. A turning point came in the mid-3rd century when, according to tradition, Saint Denis brought Christianity to the region. At that time, the Roman Empire was still pagan and hostile toward Christians. Denis was said to have been beheaded for refusing to abandon his faith. On the hill where he died, Mons Martyrum, today known as Montmartre, a church was built over his grave, now standing as the Basilica of Saint-Denis. By the late 3rd century, Lutetia, like many Roman towns, suffered frequent raids from migrating barbarian tribes. Many residents fled to the Saphir Ile de la Cité in the river's center. The monuments on the left bank were abandoned, their stones repurposed to build a defensive wall, forming the earliest city walls of Paris. From around 305 AD, the name Lutetia slowly disappeared from milestones, replaced by Civitas Parisiorum, which within a century evolved into the Latin name Parisius. As the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, Paris fell into hardship, facing new threats from groups like the Huns and the Franks. The city, however, survived largely due to Saint Genevieve, who encouraged Parisians to defend their home and was later honored as the patron saint of the city. By century's end, the Franks had seized northern Gaul, paving the way for Frankish and eventually French culture. Under their first king, Clovis I, Paris gained growing symbolic importance as the heart of the Frankish kingdom. However, with the rise of the Carolingian dynasty in 751, Paris began to lose prominence to other cities within the realm. Despite being reduced to a provincial city with little political or economic influence among the ruling elite, Paris remained rich in religious institutions, but its well-endowed churches and monasteries made it an enticing target for overseas raiders. In the 9th century, the Vikings repeatedly attacked the city, sailing up the River Seine to plunder and pillage. After initially being bought off with a ransom, the Vikings returned in the year 885, but were ultimately repelled. Their failure underscored Paris's strategic importance, prompting the Frankish rulers to strengthen its defenses. During the 10th and 11th centuries, a new city wall was constructed along the right bank, although the less populated left bank remained unfortified until the 13th century. As the new millennium dawned, Paris began to recover its status and influence, aided by the ascension of the Capetian dynasty in 987. Although the early Capetian kings controlled only the region immediately surrounding Paris, their power gradually expanded, and the city emerged as the cultural, commercial, religious, and political heart of the Kingdom of France. During the Middle Ages, many of Paris's iconic landmarks were constructed. The Ile de housed the first of many royal palaces within the city, the site of which is now occupied by the Palais de Justice, while the surrounding districts developed their own distinct identities. The left bank became a religious hub home to the great abbeys of Saint-Germain-des-Prés and Sainte-Geneviève. It also became a center of learning with the founding of the University of Paris in 1150, which attracted scholars and students from across Europe. Meanwhile, the Reich Bank thrived as a center of trade and commerce. Its markets, workshops, ports, and merchant houses transformed it into the beating heart of the city. And by the end of the 12th century, the rising population and economic activity demanded stronger protection. King Philip II responded by constructing a formidable stone wall around both banks of the Seine, completed in 1213 with numerous towers and gates. He also paved the city's muddy streets and commissioned the building of the Louvre fortress at the northern edge of the city, both to guard against external threats and to anchor the capital's growing defenses. At the center of Paris's medieval transformation to one of its most ambitious religious projects, the construction of a new cathedral. Around 1160, Bishop Maurice Doully initiated work on what would become Notre-Dame Sainte-Chapelle. The first stone was laid in 1163, and the altar was consecrated in 1182. Though construction would span 2 centuries, the cathedral's towers and facades soon came to dominate the skyline, setting a new standard for Gothic architecture. That same style reached its zenith under King Louis IX, who commissioned the Sainte-Chapelle, a royal chapel built between 1241 and 1248 to house the crown of thorns and other sacred relics. Its stained glass windows remain among the oldest in Paris and a jewel of medieval craftsmanship. In the final centuries of the Middle Ages, Paris continued to grow in size and population, becoming the largest and most popular city in Europe with some 200,000 inhabitants by the early 14th century. A new, more expansive city wall was built between 1356 and 1383 under the auspices of King Charles V, who also ordered the construction of a new fortress, the Bastille, on the eastern side of the city. Despite these developments, life for most Parisians remained unchanged and was shaped by rigid social hierarchies. The poor made up the majority of the population, comprising of laborers, peasants, beggars, and lepers. Above them were the city's craftsmen, who owned their own tools and workshops and organized themselves into trade guilds that protected their members from competition and unemployment. Above them came the city's merchants and bankers, who, although comprised just 15% of the population, their wealth and influence was crucial for the city's growth during the medieval period. Next came the clergy, who formed a similarly sized group, which also included university students. They were governed by a totally separate, but nevertheless strict hierarchy, which offered a path for social mobility to the best and brightest. Then lastly, right at the top of the social order was the hereditary nobility, many of whom made up the royal court in service to the king. The rapid increase in Paris's population and size quickly resulted in overcrowded, unsanitary streets that became breeding grounds for disease. The Black Death, which spread across Europe in the late 1340s, reached the city in 1348, killing some 50,000 people. Outbreaks continued intermittently into the 17th century. Yet plague was not the only threat to life during this time, for violence was also commonplace. Murders accounted for 55 to 80% of serious crimes, often being the result of personal slights and insults that escalated into deadly confrontations. The threat of war was also another constant. During the late 14th and early 15th centuries, Paris suffered heavily owing to the 100 Years' War being fought between France and England. The surrounding countryside was constantly ravaged by bands of marauding soldiers, and the city itself endured multiple attacks. In 1420, Paris was captured and occupied by English forces, and the child king Henry V of England was crowned as the new king of France inside Notre-Dame in 1431. English control of the city lasted until 1436, although it prompted a mass exodus of the city's population. Following its return to French control, Paris regained its former prosperity, and the population grew to 250,000 by the year 1500. During the reign of King Francis I, the city saw a wave of construction in the new Renaissance style, including bridges, fountains, and the first iteration of the Hotel Devil, which served as the city hall. Francis also began a program to strengthen Paris's status as a center of learning and culture. He founded a new faculty at the University of Paris in 1531 to teach Hebrew, Greek, and mathematics, and the city soon boasted around 75 printing presses, which by the late 16th century resulted in more books being published in Paris than in any other European city. The first half of the 16th century had been characterized by a cultural revival in Paris, but the latter half of the century witnessed some of the most turbulent years in its history as the city became embroiled in the French Wars of Religion. Between 1562 and 1598, violent conflict between France's Catholic and Protestant populations erupted across the country. Though Paris remained a Catholic stronghold, on the 23rd of August 1572, many prominent Protestants had gathered in the city to celebrate the marriage of the future King Henry IV. That night, the Royal Council ordered the assassination of the Protestant leaders, but the targeted killings quickly escalated into a widespread massacre. Over the following weeks, Catholic mobs slaughtered thousands of Protestants in what became known as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. An estimated 3,000 people were killed in Paris alone, with the violence later spreading throughout the rest of the country. By the start of the 17th century, Paris still was reeling from decades of religious conflict. A third of its population had fled. Many buildings were in ruins, and major projects such as the expansion of the Louvre, the Hotel Devil, and the Tuileries Palace were left unfinished. King Henry IV personally led efforts to rebuild the city, commissioning new works, including the Place d'Anne and the Pont Neuf, the first bridge in Paris built with apt houses. However, his efforts came to an abrupt end when he was assassinated on Rue de la Ferronnerie by a religious fanatic in 1610. Under his successors, Paris continued to develop. His widow Marie de Medici built the Luxembourg Palace in 1615, while his son King Louis XIII, along with his chief minister Cardinal Richelieu, sought to establish Paris as the cultural capital of Europe. They introduced a new architectural style inspired by Rome's churches, constructed 5 new bridges across the Seine, and founded institutions such as the Louvre Gallery, the Académie Française, and the Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture to promote the city's artistic talent. Following Louis XIII's death in 1643, his young son, Louis XIV, inherited the throne. Although political instability soon followed with rebellion by powerful Parisian nobles against royal authority, lasting until 1653. As a result, the young king developed a long-lasting distrust of Paris, and in 1671, he relocated the royal residence out of the city entirely to Versailles. Despite the king's absence, Paris continued to flourish. The old city walls, now obsolete and restrictive, were gradually dismantled and replaced by broad tree-lined boulevards. By 1680, the city's population had reached 500,000, and while the vast majority remained poor, a growing middle class began to enjoy the city's increasing number of theaters and cafe restaurants. At the turn of the 18th century, the city continued its expansion. The Champs Elysees was laid out from the Tuileries Garden to the Seine, forming part of a grand axial design of avenues and monuments. However, despite the many architectural marvels built over the previous century, much of Paris remained a dense maze of dirty, winding streets filled with overcrowded buildings. Life for most Parisians had changed little since medieval times, but new ideas were beginning to circulate among the city's more enlightened citizens. Great thinkers such as Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau frequented the city's cafes, which became key hubs for exchanging news, debating philosophy, and spreading new revolutionary ideas. By 1789, the loyalty of many Parisians to the monarchy had become increasingly strained, largely due to King Louis XV's mismanagement of the economy, which he repeatedly sought to remedy by raising further taxes on the population. That summer, a protest over the dismissal of the finance minister escalated into a riot which sparked the outbreak of the French Revolution. Over the next decade, Paris became the epicenter of one of the most significant events in world history, as France transitioned from an absolute monarchy to a republic through widespread violence, destruction, and political upheaval. The most symbolic act came on the 21st of January, 1793, when King Louis XVI was executed by guillotine at the Place de Révolution. The violence and political instability continued throughout the 1790s until a young general named Napoleon Bonaparte seized power in November 1799. He launched a coup d'etat against the ruling government, known as the Directory, and replaced it with the consulate, naming himself as first consul. Under Napoleon, Paris began to recover from the chaos and disorder of the revolution, though he ruled as a de facto absolute monarch, crowning himself as emperor in Notre-Dame Cathedral in December 1804, and spent much of his reign campaigning across Europe. He nevertheless dedicated significant effort to transforming Paris into an imperial capital worthy of ancient Rome. He commissioned new bridges across the Seine, as well as grand monuments such as the Column in Place Vendôme, topped with his own statue, and the Arc de Triomphe, which commemorated the French battles fought in the Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. However, the decades that followed brought renewed unrest. After Napoleon's downfall in 1815, Paris was briefly occupied by Allied forces from Britain, Austria, Russia, and Prussia, paving the way for the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy under King Louis V 18. Unlike previous kings, he ruled as a constitutional monarch and was succeeded by his brother Charles I X in 1824. His rule, though, became increasingly repressive, and in July 1830, after introducing decrees to curtail the freedom of the press, mass protests by Parisians quickly erupted into the July Revolution. Days of violent street fighting followed, which forced Charles and his family to flee Paris. In their place, Louis Philippe, the citizen king, was declared the new constitutional monarch, raising the tricolor flag at the Hôtel de Ville to widespread acclaim. Though Louis Philippe's reign ushered in a period of industrial growth and infrastructure development, including Paris's first railway stations, the city's rapidly growing population was reaching almost 1 million people, with many facing poverty and inequality. A series of uprisings consequently rocked Paris throughout the 1830s. One of the most notable being the 1832 revolt, which was immortalized in Victor Hugo's Les Miserables. The mounting discontent culminated in the February Revolution of 1848, when mass protests led the army to abandon the king, forcing his abdication and exile. Later that year, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, nephew of Napoleon I, was elected as France's first president. But being barred by the Constitution when seeking re-election, he staged a coup d'etat in December 1851 and declared himself as Emperor Napoleon III in the following year, 1852, ushering in the era of the Second Empire. The new emperor launched an ambitious program of urban renewal under the direction of his prefect of the Seigneur Suzanne Haussmann. The goals were twofold: to combat unemployment and to transform the city with clean water, light, air, and open space. Haussmann began by expanding the city's boundaries beyond the original 12 districts, annexing surrounding communes to create the 20th arrondissement that defined Paris today. Broad tree-lined boulevards were cut through the dense medieval neighborhoods to improve traffic flow and connect the city's newly rebuilt railway stations, such as the Garden and Garden. Strict architectural regulations were also imposed to ensure visual harmony, with uniform facades of creamy white stone being widely adopted, a style that still defines central Paris. Haussmann also created 4 large parks at the cardinal points of the city, installed tens of thousands of gas lights to illuminate streets, and began construction of the Grand Palais Opera House. During this period, Paris also became a hub of industrial activity and a global financial center, with the Paris BS flourishing as a major stock market for investment. Yet despite these achievements, Napoleon III's reign ended in catastrophe. In September 1870, he was defeated and captured at the Battle of Sedan during the Franco-Russian War, after which he abdicated and left Paris open to the advancing Prussian army, which quickly began to besiege the city. The winter of 1870 to 1871 plunged Paris into desperation. Food shortages led many Parisians to eat cats, dogs, rats, and even zoo animals. Following weeks of bombardment, Paris surrendered on the 28th of January, but the Prussians only briefly occupied the city, and the resulting power vacuum allowed for the rise of a radical municipal government to take control, the Paris Commune. Dominated by socialists and anarchists, the Commune attempted sweeping social reforms, but lasted barely 2 months. In May of that year, French government forces launched a brutal assault to retake the city, resulting in a week of fierce street fighting in which thousands were killed. After its fall, Paris came under strict control by the conservative national government, and its rebellious spirit was forcibly subdued. In the decades that followed, Paris entered a golden age of cultural, artistic, and commercial transformation, known to history as the Belle Epoque. As the scars of war faded, the city flourished as a global capital of modernity and a playground for the wealthy. Grand department stores like Le Bon Mar and Galeries Lafayette helped birth a culture of mass consumerism. Paris dazzled the world through 5 international expositions between 1855 in 1900, drawing millions of visitors and showcasing the city's innovations in industry, art, and technology. One of these installations was originally constructed as a temporary feature for the 1889 exposition to commemorate the centenary of the French Revolution. But the Eiffel Tower proved so popular that it became a permanent and iconic feature of the city's skyline. It was also during this period that Paris emerged as the epicenter of modern art. Early in the movement, artists like Édouard Manet and Claude Monet pioneered Impressionism, and by the end of the 19th century, the city had become home to creative giants such as Renoir, Picasso, Touel, and Matisse. With the arrival of the 20th century, however, Paris, like much of Europe, became profoundly changed following the outbreak of the First World War. In September 1914, the city was threatened with encirclement by advancing German forces, but the offensive was halted at the First Battle of the Marne, famously aided by 600 Paris taxis, which transported 6,000 troops to the front. During the war, the city endured sporadic aerial bombings, Zeppelin raids, and long-range artillery fire from the German Paris gun, which launched shells from over 80 miles away. After the war, Paris faced high unemployment, inflation, and rationing. Yet in the 1920s, it once again flourished as a cultural capital with writers, artists, and musicians, such as Ernest Hemingway, Igor Stravinsky, and James Joyce flocking to the city. Jazz music thrived, offering a platform for Paris's small but growing Black communities to showcase their talents. But beneath the cultural renaissance lay deepening social and political divisions, which by the 1930s had become a battleground of political extremism, with tensions intensifying in the lead-up to the Second World War. Following Germany's invasion of Poland in September 1939, France declared war. Although thousands of children were evacuated from the city and the remaining population being issued with gas masks and building bomb shelters, it was all in vain. The German army simply bypassed the French defenses and entered Paris virtually unopposed in June 1940 without a shot being fired. The French government relocated the Vichy, while the city itself became the administrative center for the German High Command in France, with many cafes, hotels, theaters, and cinemas being forced to accommodate their new occupiers. For Parisians, the occupation meant humiliation, shortages, and repression, but none suffered more so than the city's Jewish population. Forced to wear the yellow Star of David and barred from public life, more than 12,000 Parisian Jews were rounded up and deported to camps like Auschwitz. It was only after 4 long years of German rule and the growing activity of the French resistance that Paris was finally liberated in August 1944, with Allied troops parading through its streets to euphoric crowds. In the post-war decades, Paris entered a new phase of transformation. Reconstruction efforts sought to repair the years of damage and neglect, while waves of immigrants from former French colonies in North and Central Africa reshaped the city's cultural and social landscape. Urban renewal projects gradually restored architectural splendor and civic life. So much so, by the 1980s, Paris had regained much of its international prestige. It was once again widely seen as the global capital of art, fashion, cuisine, and culture, creating an enduring appeal from not just its aesthetic beauty, but also in its extraordinary resilience. Time and time again, through bouts of plague, revolution, and war, Paris has continually risen to reclaim its rightful title and place as one of the most beautiful and captivating cities in the world. Help me grow this community. Hit subscribe and let's build together.